So on behalf of the Irish Landscape Institute, I want to extend my thanks to Matt here this afternoon. Greetings on the 4th of June, 2026. Matt joins us not from the distant shores of South Africa, where you had once worked, nor from Manchester, where you once hailed from, but indeed from Tuam, just north of Galway City, where you've been based for almost a decade, working in the space around not only play provision, but a practical background in play safety. Matt, I think I'll leave a broader introduction up to yourself if that's okay, or if it's something that you want to do. The talk itself today will probably span about 45 minutes, which will give us 10 or 15 minutes at the very end for a few questions in response to Matt's presentation and his experience professionally. Without any further ado, Matt, I'm happy to hand the microphone over to yourself, if that's okay. Thank you.
That's grand, yes. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for taking the time to join this session. I'd like to start off by saying that much of what I'll discuss today will already be familiar to you all because it sits within the normal language of public realm design. Movement, planting, levels, edges, and long-term use. My aim is to look specifically at how those principles translate into playground design and delivery. So today I'm speaking about planning-led, environmentally sensitive and inclusive playground design. These three themes are closely connected. When they're considered together, play environments tend to feel more natural, more durable and more meaningful within the wider public realm. The intention today is not to focus on equipment or individual products. It's to look at how play can support the landscape framework that landscape architects are already shaping. We do this through movement, planting, levels, access, social space, and long-term place value. In many projects, play is introduced quite late, often because budgets, procurement, or programming decisions are still developing. But when play is considered earlier, it can integrate much more naturally with circulation, topography, planting, and gathering spaces. The planning-led approach begins with the site, not with equipment. It starts by asking how people move, where families gather, how children approach challenge, and how play can reinforce those behaviours rather than interrupt them. That's the perspective I'll work through today. The thread running through the session is simple. Play works best when it's treated as part of the landscape, rather than as a separate package added once the wider design is already fixed. That applies to public parks, schools, housing schemes, civic spaces, and community facilities. I'll keep the focus practical and design-facing, looking at decisions that can be made early enough to influence the quality of finished environments. By way of introduction, my work sits at the intersection of playground design, technical coordination, and project delivery. I work with landscape architects, local authorities, schools and design teams across Ireland on public parks, civic spaces, school environments, and community projects. In practical terms, my role is often to help translate landscape design intent into play environments that are buildable, compliant, durable, and still aligned with the quality of the wider landscape design. That involvement can happen at concept stage, during technical coordination, or later during delivery. But in my experience, the most productive time to involve play expertise is early, when the spatial structure of the site is still being shaped. At that stage, we're not simply selecting equipment. We're asking how play might reinforce circulation, relate to landform, support social space, and sit comfortably within the wider public realm. That practical delivery perspective is important. The strongest design ideas still have to survive budgets, procurement, installation, maintenance, and public use. My interest is in helping those ideas stay intact from early concept through to a finished space. This means my perspective is not purely theoretical. It comes from seeing how early ideas are translated into budgets, drawings, supply, installation, inspection, maintenance, and public use. I also bring a technical delivery perspective, including operational inspection and PSCS experience on play-specific works. Play is increasingly recognised as part of social infrastructure. Well-designed play environments support physical activity, social interaction, well-being and placemaking, but they also influence how public spaces function. From a landscape perspective, playgrounds often act as anchors. They attract activity, support informal meeting points, and help animate surrounding paths, seating areas, cafes, and open spaces. Play spaces are also some of the first environments where children learn how to interact with movement, challenge, confidence, and each other within shared public space. This matters because playgrounds influence dwell time. When children are engaged, parents and carers remain nearby. That creates natural activity around seating, paths, edges, and gathering spaces. The play environment can turn a place people pass through into a place where people pause, where people interact, and where people spend time with each other. Children also experience landscape differently to adults. Slopes, planting, pathways, level changes, and edges all become part of the play experience. So when play is considered as part of the landscape framework, it becomes easier to create environments that feel integrated rather than inserted. So the discussion about play is really a discussion about how people experience landscape space and how those experiences support activity, exploration, and social interaction. It's really particularly relevant in Irish towns, parks, schools, and local authority projects, where a play space can become one of the few consistent reasons families return to the same public space regularly. In that sense, play often carries more public value than its footprint suggests. When a play space is planned well, it often improves the performance of the wider site. It gives people a reason to enter, to slow down, to gather, and then to return. This is a useful commercial and design point for clients as well, because the play space can support the performance of the wider park, not just satisfy a brief for children's facilities. Expectations around play spaces have changed significantly. There's been a clear shift away from seeing a playground as a simple collection of equipment within a fenced area. Clients, communities, and design teams increasingly expect play spaces to be site responsive, inclusive, environmentally sensitive, and connected to the character of the landscape around them. The success of a play space is no longer judged purely by the quantity of play provision. It's judged by how well it sits within the site, how naturally people interact with it, and whether it provides meaningful experiences for different users. Inclusion is now expected to be embedded into the design, not treated as an add-on. Environmental sensitivity is also central, including material choice, visual impact, drainage, maintenance, and long-term public value. The key question has shifted from what equipment are we putting here to what kind of play environment is right for this particular place. That change in thinking opens the door to a more planning-led approach. This doesn't mean that every playground needs to become highly complex or expensive. In many cases, it means the opposite. Fewer disconnected pieces, better sitting, better circulation, clearer access, more thoughtful material choices, and stronger integration within the wider landscape. The visual comparison here is not intended to criticize older approaches. It simply shows how the brief has changed from provision-led design towards experience-led and landscape-led thinking. Every successful play environment begins with understanding the site. That might sound obvious here, but playground design still too often begins with equipment selection. The planning-led approach works in the opposite direction. It begins with the landscape and how people already interact with it. This means looking at circulation, topography, existing planting, desire lines, access, visibility, and the relationship between different parts of the site. Desire lines are particularly useful. They often show where people already prefer to walk, gather, or pause. And when playgrounds respond to those patterns, the environment tends to feel more intuitive, more natural. Topography is equally important. Slopes, terraces, and changes in level can support challenge and exploration without relying only on large structures. A change in level might support climbing or sliding. A cluster of trees might become a place for exploration or retreat, or a pathway might become a route linking different play experiences. Children are naturally drawn to edges and slopes. They're naturally drawn to level changes and places that allow discovery. And when those characteristics are recognised early, they become design opportunities. By understanding the site first, play provision provides something that supports the landscape rather than competing with it. It also makes the play environment harder to value engineer out later because it has become part of the spatial structure of the master plan rather than a separate item added at the end. This is also where practical constraints should be welcomed rather than treated as late-stage problems. Existing trees, services, drainage routes, boundaries, slopes, access points, and surrounding uses all tell us something about how the space should work. When those factors are understood early, they can inform the design rather than restrict it. On this type of plan, I'd be looking for the obvious constraints first, but also for the less obvious opportunities: shade, desire lines, natural supervision points, possible quiet edges, and where play could strengthen existing movement. So the plan is not just a technical background, it's the first design tool because it shows the pressures, opportunities, and behavioural patterns the play space should respond to. Once the site is understood, the next question is how play fits into the wider master plan. A successful play environment should not feel isolated. It should sit naturally within the network of paths, planting, entrances and social spaces, and the surrounding uses. The arrival experience into the space is very important. Not every child or family arrives ready to participate immediately. Good layouts allow users to observe, understand, and build confidence before fully engaging. If access routes are unclear, or if the space feels visually overwhelming on entry, some users may disengage before even exploring. By contrast, clear movement routes, predictable transitions, and places to pause help spaces feel more intuitive and welcoming. Passive supervision is also central here. Visibility from paths, seating, and social areas helps families feel comfortable. Parents and carers are constantly making small decisions: where to sit, how close to remain, whether they can supervise comfortably, and whether the wider environment feels safe and socially comfortable. Playgrounds are therefore not only spaces for children, they're social environments for families and communities. When plays are integrated into the wider landscape framework, it strengthens the public realm experience rather than functioning as a separate destination. This is where play begins to contribute to the public realm. It can support a cafe edge, strengthen a route to a school, activate a park entrance, or give families a reason to stay within a civic space. The master plan should therefore ask not only where the playground sits, but how it changes behaviour around it. The same thinking applies to seating. Seating is not simply an accessory. Its position can shape supervision, dwell time, social comfort, and whether families feel they can remain in the space for longer. If these relationships are resolved early, the playground becomes easier to defend through later stages because it contributes to the wider public realm logic of the scheme. A traditional approach to playground design has often been to separate spaces very clearly by age group. In some situations, that is still useful. Younger children, older children, teenagers, parents, carers and family groups may all need different types of space, different levels of challenge, and different levels of supervision. So the point is not that zoning is wrong. Zoning can be very valuable when it helps the whole environment work more clearly. The issue is when zoning separates users into disconnected areas rather than allowing the whole family to remain part of the same wider play experience. A stronger approach is what I would describe as layered zoning. That means creating areas with different levels of intensity, different types of activity, and different confidence thresholds, while still allowing the overall space to feel connected. For example, a toddler area may need to feel secure and easy to supervise. Older children may need more challenge, height, speed, or movement. Parents and carers need places to sit, observe, and remain socially comfortable. Some users may need quieter edges, while others will move immediately towards more active areas. When these zones are planned properly, the playground becomes more than a collection of separate age areas, as we see here. It becomes a family environment. Different users can engage in different ways, but still remain connected through sightlines, through circulation, through seating, through shared edges and movement routes. This is where play value distribution becomes important. Play value does not need to sit only within one large structure or one dominant focal point. It can be spread across the site through climbing, sliding, balancing, social spaces, planting edges, quieter areas, landform and informal routes. That distribution helps reduce pressure on one single part of the playground. In doing so, it can also reduce conflict because children are not all being drawn to the same single point of activity. It also allows children to build confidence gradually. One child may start in a lower intensity area, then move towards a more challenging route after watching others. Another may use the same space socially by observing, repeating a familiar movement, or remaining close to a carer. That's why zoning should not be based only on age. Age matters, of course, but confidence, familiarity, physical development, sensory comfort, and social behaviour also influence how children use a play space. A well-planned playground can therefore support different ages and different abilities without making the space feel fragmented. The objective is to create an environment where the whole family can stay, the whole family can observe and participate, and move between experiences comfortably. When zoning works well, it doesn't divide the playground. It helps organise the experience, making the space easier to understand and easier to supervise. And as a result of that, much more enjoyable for a wider range of users. Once that spatial structure is understood, collaboration between the wider design team becomes especially important because these decisions affect movement, visibility, surfacing, seating, planting, and the long-term success of the whole environment. Successful play environments rarely come from one discipline working in isolation. They emerge through collaboration between landscape architects, play specialists, engineers, client teams, maintenance teams, and installation contractors. This matters because play sits across several areas at once: spatial design, behavioural interaction, accessibility, technical compliance, maintenance, budget, and long-term management. The early concept stage is especially valuable. Simple sketches, precedent imagery, circulation studies, and behavioural observations can all help test how play might sit within the wider landscape. Different disciplines as well will view the same site through different lenses. Landscape architects, for example, might focus on circulation, spatial legibility, planting and structure. Play specialists may focus on challenge progression, confidence participation, and usability. Maintenance teams, of course, will focus on durability and practical operation. And clients, well, they're going to focus on the budget, risk, and public perception. Bringing these perspectives together early usually leads to stronger outcomes. It's also important that collaboration is not only technical. Some of the most useful discussions are behavioural, where families may gather, how legible the space feels, whether quieter retreat exists, and how confidently different users can approach challenge. These questions cannot always be answered through standards alone. They require observation-led thinking. A small design decision made early can have a large effect later. For example, the position of a path, the orientation of seating, or the decision to keep a tree within the play area can influence supervision, movement, shade, identity, and play value. Those are exactly the kinds of decisions that benefit from early collaboration. It's also where procurement can be managed more intelligently. If the design intent is clear, it becomes easier to protect the core experience even when budgets, substitutions, or technical adjustments arise. The earlier this discussion happens, the less likely it is that play becomes a late-stage compromise or a catalogue exercise. Material choice also has a major influence on how a play environment sits within the wider landscape. The materials selected affect not only opening day appearance, but also aging, maintenance, and visual comfort. and how the space naturally integrates over time. Timber can soften a space visually and often works well in parkland, woodland, and more natural settings. Steel can provide a cleaner, more contemporary expression and may be very appropriate in civic or high-use urban environments. The important point here is not that one material is universally better than the other. The material strategy should respond to the character, intensity, and use patterns of the site. Environmental sensitivity is therefore not only about aesthetics, it's about how comfortable, legible, durable, and socially usable the environment feels. Visual intensity is also important. Highly dominant structures, very bright colour palettes, or excessive visual complexity can overwhelm sensitive landscapes or make spaces harder to read. In some contexts, restraint improves usability and comfort. Longevity also matters, of course. Sustainability is not only about materials on a specification sheet, it's about how long a space remains socially valuable, visually coherent, and behaviourally successful. Material selection should therefore be part of the broader landscape strategy, not just a supplier decision. For landscape architects, the key is to match material character to place. A natural parkland edge may call for a quieter material response, while a civic or high-use urban environment may benefit from a more robust and visually legible structure. Both can be environmentally sensitive when they're used in the right context. This is why I avoid presenting timber and steel as opposing answers. They're tools. The more important question is what kind of public environment the site needs to become. One of the most effective ways to create environmentally sensitive play is to work with the landscape rather than against it. Existing trees, slopes, edges, planting, level changes, and natural movement routes all contribute to the play experience. Children use landscape in ways adults don't immediately anticipate. A planted edge may become a balancing route. A small level change may become a challenge. A group of boulders may become a social space. A quiet edge may become a place to observe before joining in. This is why observation-led thinking is so important. Children rarely use spaces exactly as designers expect. The most successful moments are not the most heavily programmed ones. They're the informal interactions that emerge through movement and discovery, moving between trees, gathering near planting, using edges for balance, or pausing near active areas. Landscape-led play does not mean low-energy play. It can still be active, social, and challenging. The difference is that the landscape becomes part of the behavioural experience rather than simply a backdrop to equipment. The objective: to create environments where movement, challenge, retreat, interaction, and social activity feel naturally connected to the wider site. This is also where the landscape can provide richness without adding unnecessary clutter. A mound, a planted edge, a retained tree, or a gentle route through a site can create play value, sensory comfort, and spatial identity at the same time. The same principle applies to planting. Planting is not only visual softening, it can provide enclosure, wayfinding, shade, seasonal interest, sensory variation, and calmer edges within an active play environment. This is often where the most memorable play experiences come from, because children discover the environment rather than simply move from one item to the next. Surfacing is one of the most influential elements of the playground, both visually and functionally. It affects accessibility, it affects safety, drainage, maintenance, movement, and how the environment is experienced. While compliance is essential, surfacing also shapes how intuitive and comfortable a space feels. Large, uninterrupted synthetic surfaces can dominate a landscape visually, as we see here. Softer or more permeable approaches may support calmer and more integrated public realm experiences, depending on the site. Surfacing also influences movement. Changes in texture, colour, edge treatment, or material can affect where people travel, where children pause, and how naturally different parts of a space connect. Drainage becomes part of the same discussion. Poor drainage quickly reduces long-term usability, even where the original design concept is strong. As I'm sure you can agree, puddling, erosion, mud, and surface deterioration can make spaces feel neglected and uncomfortable. It's another reminder that technical compliance alone does not always equal behavioural success. A space may meet standards and still feel difficult to navigate, visually overwhelming, or uncomfortable to use. The best surfacing strategies quietly support the wider landscape experience. This is especially important here in Ireland, where wet weather, maintenance access, grass growth, and drainage performance all influence how a play space feels after the opening photographs are taken. A good surfacing strategy needs to support the design in everyday conditions, not only on completion day. Surfacing choices can also affect maintenance perception. If edges fail, surfaces stain, water sits, or grass cannot be managed properly, the whole environment can quickly feel less cared for. Inclusion is widely discussed in playground design, but it's also often misunderstood. An inclusive play environment should consider physical, sensory, cognitive, emotional, and social experiences together. Why? Because different children engage with spaces in very different ways. Some seek movement, sound, challenge, and interaction pretty much immediately. Others need calmer routes, quieter edges, repetition, or time to observe before they'll participate. Inclusive design is therefore not always about adding specialist features. It's about reducing barriers to participation across the entire environment. Clear circulation, visual legibility, balanced sensory intensity, pause spaces, and opportunities for gradual engagement can all make a space feel more comfortable, usable, and welcoming. A useful way to think about this is behavioural flexibility. Good inclusive environments allow different forms of participation to coexist. Active play, observation, parallel play, quieter movement, and social interaction at the edge. Some users participate socially before they participate physically. Being able to remain comfortably within the environment, watch others, and feel part of the wider atmosphere can already represent meaningful participation. These decisions usually benefit everyone. Clear, calm, intuitive, and flexible environments are easier for all users to enjoy. This is why I think inclusion should be discussed as usability and not only as accessibility. Accessibility asks whether someone can reach something. Usability asks whether the wider environment feels understandable, comfortable, welcoming, and worth staying in. This is especially relevant for children who need time to process a space. A successful layout lets them understand what's happening before asking them to take part. It's also a useful way to discuss inclusion without making the conversation overly clinical. We're talking about how the environment works for people. Inclusive playgrounds should support both independent and shared experiences. For some users, independence is very important. For others, the most valuable part of a play space is social connection. Circulation plays a major role. Logical movement routes, clear transitions, and places to pause all influence how confidently people move through a space. Shared play doesn't mean everyone doing the same thing. In many successful environments, children are interacting socially while engaging with the landscape differently. One child might be climbing, another might be observing nearby, while another's repeating a familiar route, and others around them gather around a familiar space. All of those behaviours can represent meaningful shared participation. The objective, not to make every experience identical. To create environments where more people can participate meaningfully and comfortably within the same public realm. Confidence, as we know, often develops gradually through return use, observation of peers, and familiarity with movement routes. This is particularly important in family settings where siblings, friends, carers, and children with different abilities may all be using the same space together. The best environments allow them to share the space without requiring them to use it in identical ways. This is where edge conditions matter. Edges can support observation, quieter social participation, supervision, and gradual entry into more active parts of the play environment. Inclusive equipment has an important role to play, but it should ideally feel integrated into the overall play experience rather than separated from it. Historically, some projects approached inclusion by placing a small number of specialist items at the edge of a scheme. That approach is usually well-intentioned, and the equipment itself may provide real value, but it can sometimes reinforce separation rather than participation. This image is a useful example of that challenge. It shows that access has been provided, but it also raises a wider design question. Is the experience socially connected to the rest of the playground, or is it physically and visually separated from the wider play environment? That distinction is important. Access alone doesn't always equal inclusion. A child may be able to use a particular item, but if that item sits apart from the main play experience, the wider opportunity for shared participation may still be limited. The stronger approach here is integration. That may involve multiple routes through a structure, ground level and elevated experiences working together, sensory play distributed across the landscape, or social spaces that allow different users to participate in different ways. Inclusive strategies do not always need to be visually obvious. One of the strongest inclusive environments often the strongest inclusive environments feel intuitive rather than overtly specialized. Users may not consciously recognize why a space feels comfortable to navigate, but decisions around movement, visibility, pacing, surfacing, seating, and retreat make a significant difference. The equipment strategy therefore needs to support the spatial strategy. In practice, this means avoiding the idea that one inclusive item solves the brief. It very rarely does. The aim is to create a wider environment where inclusive participation is distributed naturally and socially connected. When inclusive equipment is embedded into the wider play sequence, it becomes part of the shared experience rather than a separate provision. That leads naturally into the next topic, which is how we manage risk and challenge without removing opportunities for development. Risk is one of the most important and sometimes misunderstood parts of playground design. Managed risk is a normal part of childhood development. Climbing, balancing, moving at height, navigating social situations all help children develop confidence, develop coordination, resilience, and decision-making abilities. The key distinction is between risk and hazard. Hazards are unintended dangers that users cannot reasonably anticipate. Risk, however, is different. It allows children, when managed, to assess movement, make decisions, and build confidence through experience. Challenge shouldn't feel binary. Good environments allow users to engage with difficulty at different levels and at different speeds. Some children may immediately attempt demanding experiences, while others may observe, test lower level routes, or return repeatedly before progressing on to more challenging situations. Challenge is also not only physical. Think about that for a second. Challenge is also not only physical. Social confidence, sensory comfort, navigation, and interaction with unfamiliar environments can all represent challenge. The objective is not to create risk-free environments. It's to create environments where challenge feels understandable, manageable, rewarding, and developmentally valuable. The point is important for client observations. If challenge is removed too aggressively, children will often find challenge elsewhere, sometimes in less appropriate ways. A better approach is to provide challenge that is visible, understandable, and proportionate. Good challenge also supports return use. A child may not use the most difficult route on the first visit, but they may return to it after watching others or after building confidence over time. That is a very different message from simply saying that risk is acceptable. The design still has to be careful, intentional, and proportionate. A planning-led approach should contribute beyond concept stage through procurement, construction, and long-term maintenance. The success of a play environment depends not only on its initial visual impact, but on how well it ages and how well it remains usable over time. Delivery pressures can weaken design intent if long-term thinking is not established early. Budget pressure, procurement adjustments, maintenance limitations, and operational realities all influence how environments perform once they are in use. Sometimes simplicity and clarity are extremely valuable. Spaces that remain legible, intuitive, and operationally manageable often age better than environments that rely heavily on novelty or complexity. People also respond behaviorally to how cared for an environment feels. Spaces that look neglected or difficult to understand can lose social value even if they remain technically functional. The strongest environments retain public trust. Families return repeatedly, patterns of use develop, and a space becomes embedded in community life. This is where design and delivery have to remain connected. The play environment may look strong at concept stage, but if specification, surfacing, drainage, foundations, access, or maintenance are weakened during delivery, the public experience will suffer. For local authorities and public clients, this matters commercially as well as socially, because spaces that remain coherent and trusted over time deliver stronger public value from the original investment. To make that more tangible, I want to move now from principle into an observed example of a nature-led playground environment. This example brings together many of the ideas discussed so far. The wider landscape plays an active role in how the space is experienced. Movement routes, planting, topography, and play opportunities work together rather than existing as separate layers. Children can move through the environment in different ways, discover quieter edges, engage socially, and interact with the landscape through climbing, balancing, movement, and informal exploration. The strength of a nature-led environment is that it encourages exploration rather than directing every user through a fixed sequence. It also supports sensory variety, changing textures, sheltered spaces, planting, sightlines, and quieter edges. These environments often support longer dwell time because families move through them more gradually. Activity becomes distributed across the landscape rather than concentrated around a focal point. In many cases, the memorable moments are the informal ones, routes between trees, gathering at edges, discovering quieter spaces, or returning to challenge over time. This type of project also shows why nature-led play should not be mistaken for low-value play. It can support high levels of movement, challenge and imagination, and social interaction, while still feeling grounded in the landscape. For a landscape audience, the key observation is that the play value is not only in the structures, it's in the relationship between the structure and the route, the edge, the planting, the level change, and choice. This kind of observational study is useful because it shows that nature-led design is not an aesthetic label. It changes movement, pace, supervision, participation, and how families stay within the space. The main takeaway is that successful play environments are planned rather than purchased. The quality is shaped by how naturally people move through them, how comfortably different users participate, and how well the space integrates into the wider landscape. Behavior within the space matters. How people move, gather, pause, observe, participate, and build confidence should influence how play environments are planned. Inclusion is supported through subtle spatial decisions, clear circulation, manageable transitions, layered challenge, quieter edges, pause opportunities, and behavioural flexibility. Environmental sensitivity is also broader than aesthetics. It includes how spaces age, how socially comfortable they feel, how intuitively they function, and how successfully they support long-term community use. The most successful play environments are often remembered not because of individual structures, but because of how people felt while they were using them. For me, this is the central professional point. Landscape architects are already working with the tools that make play environments successful. The opportunity is to bring play into those conversations earlier and treat it as part of the landscape brief. If there's one practical shift to take away, it's this. Consider play before the layout is fixed, not after. That single timing change can protect a huge amount of design quality. That is where landscape architects have real influence, because the core decisions are about space, they're about movement, they're about planting, levels, edges, comfort, and long-term public value. To close, I hope this presentation has shown that playground design is about far more than equipment selection. At its best, it's about understanding how people experience space, how confidence develops through interaction, and how public environments support participation and belonging. Many principles already familiar within landscape architecture, such as circulation, placemaking, environmental sensitivity, and behavioural interaction, are central to successful play environments. Good playground design is ultimately about creating more ways for people to participate, connect, and belong within public space. So if anyone's working on any early stage park, school, housing, civic or public realm project where play forms part of the brief, I'd be happy to offer an initial design review or have an informal project discussion. Often the most useful conversations happen before equipment selected, when circulation, inclusion, play value, and site constraints can still be shaped properly. This offer is not intended as a formal commitment or sales meeting, simply a practical way to test ideas early, before layouts become fixed, and before opportunities around movement, inclusion, landscape character, and play value are harder to influence. I'd also be very happy to hear observations from your own projects, because many of the strongest ideas in this area come from watching how spaces are actually used after completion. Thank you very much for your time today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. That was a really comprehensive overview of not only the work that you do, but also so many of the observations that you've been in a position to sort of take note of and therefore apply to your work thereafter. Is that fair to say that a lot of your work would seemingly be based not only on sort of technical expertise, but sort of learning through the job?
Yes. Yeah, practical expertise.
Exactly. Yeah. I know that we're opening it up for a few questions here, which is brilliant, and that there's one or two which are coming through. I might just quickly jump the gun and ask, how do you avoid inclusive equipment feeling tokenistic?
I think the main risk is treating inclusion as a product category rather than a design principle. An inclusive item placed at the edge of a scheme may technically provide access, but it still feels socially separate. So meaningful inclusion is stronger when accessible and inclusive opportunities are woven into the wider play environment. So that might mean ground level play or elevated experiences with multiple access routes or sensory elements distributed across the site, with sort of clear circulation, social seating, retreat spaces, and places where children can participate together in different ways. I don't think the question should be, what inclusive item do we need? I think it should be, how does the whole environment allow different users to participate, observe, move, interact, and belong?
Yeah, brilliant. Um, Obviously happy to entertain any questions from the floor. I'm not sure. Julia, you have your hand up there.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Matt, thank you for the webinar. Because I'm originally from the countryside where most playgrounds were very nature-led and informal. So, and I'm still kind of not really used to the urban playgrounds because sometimes they remind me of, I don't know, zoo kind of environment. So I have a question, like how do you balance the inclusion and accessibility with the opportunities for change, adventure, and play?
So can you balance inclusion with challenge?
Yeah,
So,
how to
so
include.
I
Yeah,
think inclusion should not mean reducing challenge for everyone. I think the better approach is to provide layered challenge where different users can engage at different levels and at different speeds. So like we've covered, some children will move quickly towards heights, climbing, speed, or social interaction, while others might observe first or repeat familiar movements and build confidence gradually before engaging more actively. So a good inclusive play environment allows those behaviors to coexist. It provides accessible movement, quieter pause points, clear circulation, and shared social spaces, alongside challenge that can be sort of approached progressively. So the aim is always not to make every experience identical. It's to create more ways for different users to participate meaningfully.
yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Art McCormick has a quick question here, if you don't mind. It's the incorporation of water. He says, have you ever thought about incorporating water? Obviously, there's a significant risk in doing so, but it introduces a whole other dimension to play and entertainment. So go for it, Matt. Yeah.
So water, especially when combined with sand, is it's just like a magnet for children. It appeals to every age group. It transgresses all boundaries that we know of. Um, Certainly, we come up a lot of kickback against water in the Irish environment. Clients, especially, will say, "But it rains so often that do we really need it?" The short answer is yes, because it crosses all of those social barriers. It brings children of all abilities and ages together simultaneously in environments that may not necessarily allow without the water being in place. So definitely there is scope for water in this, but that it is a very specialist topic and one that's probably worthwhile discussing for an hour on its own.
Yeah, without question, it sort of brings with it its own risk and reward. It could be said
Yes.
in terms of making a special place even more special, but probably heightening the sense of risk for users and for the supplier. Um, there's a number of other questions just coming through here, Matt. One in particular asks about one of the themes that you mentioned at the outset, which is intergenerational playground design, which I thought was such an interesting topic. What is the sort of the emerging trend behind intergenerational playground supply in Ireland? Is this something that is emerging as a sort of a popular approach to playground design, Matt?
It's something that I think needs to be considered a lot more. We are seeing play spaces in general sort of moving away from the old sort of KFC type installation into a more family focused environment.
Yeah.
And as long as we keep heading down that path, we're sort of leaning quite naturally into generational environments which cater for the whole family. And when you cater for the whole family, you create public realm environments that work and perform a lot longer than simple playgrounds stuck on the side of a field.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe that ties comfortably into a query from Ross as well, which simply asks, aside from the precedents or projects that you've discussed today and shown on screen, which are brilliant to see. We can kind of really examine some of the strengths of those. Are there any particular spaces, play spaces, that immediately come to mind which you believe demonstrate the true success of what you're advocating for?
I haven't been out to the new Fernhill one out in Dunleary Rathdown. I was involved in the design side of it for a short period of time. It's only just opened. I sort of intend to get down there in the next couple of weeks, but based on design, I'd say that's one definitely worth um, a look there. Sorry, I've just lost the question slightly there.
Yeah, no, I suppose no, you've answered it. I think, which is, are there any particular project examples for people, I suppose, on the call, whether they're in Ireland? I think a lot of people are going to be based in Ireland if they're on this call. So, kind of really strong Irish examples that you can point to and just say, there's a really encouraging example of uh, delivering some of the principles that you've
Yes.
described. Yeah. So I think the Fernhill one certainly, although it's a recently developed one. Um, I'm thinking of some of the playgrounds even around Dublin city centre. I know that for myself and my daughter, there's a very popular playground up in Fairview, which seems to, which this is from my own personal kind of observation. It seems to be quite successful in encouraging a whole range of kids between the ages of 6 months and 16 years.
Yeah.
Which is the sign of any successful space when you have a whole broad range of
And
attendees
another
and participants. Yeah.
another one of my favourites really is it's not one of the mainstream ones either. It's a small little city park called St James's Park.
Oh yeah.
It's just off the Fatima Luas station in Dublin,
Yeah.
and it sort of caters to. It's got sensory elements, it's got group play elements, it's got socializing elements. Caters to the full range of play. It caters to the full family, really.
Yes.
Um, and it doesn't have a massive amount of play provision in the way of play structures. It uses the landscape very, very successfully.
Yeah, and that's another really encouraging example, I suppose, of one that if attendees here are out in the city, then it's something that they can actually see just by passing by. There's a couple of more queries coming through, and apologies that they're rolling in as we only have 2 minutes left. Um, it was asked earlier, it's a very basic question, Matt, but at what stage should a play specialist be brought into a project? And my thought is that based on today, it might be at a very early stage. But what are you thinking in terms? Obviously, rolling it in at the 11th hour doesn't help anyone.
No, definitely not. I think the best answer there is ideally at concept stage.
Sure.
Not because equipment needs to be selected early, but because the key decisions around movement, levels, access, visibility, supervision, inclusion, are already being shaped at that point. When a play specialist is brought in after the master plan is largely fixed, the playground can become sort of a separate technical package. But when input happens earlier, play can support the wider landscape strategy rather than interrupt it. So the most useful early conversations are usually not about products. They're about how the space is likely to be used, where the families might gather, how children will approach challenge, and how play can strengthen the wider public realm environment. Um,
Yeah,
that early input usually reduces redesign later. It helps to protect design intent and makes procurement much easier to manage.
for sure. It kind of makes a lot of sense as well how you've outlined that. The sooner the better, really.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's 1 minute to two, and I think we're obliged to wrap it up in the next few seconds, unfortunately, Matt. So I want to extend a very wide thanks to the over 70 participants who subscribed to this online webinar. Just it's part of the Irish Landscape Institute's sort of growing capacity to provide members and non-members with information across the wider industry, but specifically to the development of quality open space. So I think this really ties closely into the themes that all landscape architects are concerned or indeed engaged with. So I want to thank you, Matt, on behalf of the Irish Landscape Institute for providing this information and certainly for committing your time here today. That's certainly on behalf of not only those in attendance, but those across the wider Institute membership also. So thank you very much. There's a number of very kind thank you messages coming through in the messages also. So, you know, you can always read through those as well. But certainly at 2 o'clock now, Matt, thank you very much. Have you got any final words, or will we just...
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. And as people can probably see, my email is on screen. If you've got any follow-up questions, you know, feel free, pop them through to me. I have got a couple of appointments on the go now. I won't be able to come back to you straight away, but certainly within the next day or two, we'll get sorted.
Amazing. And you're contactable not only by email. We were able to tag you on LinkedIn also, so you're accessible through various means and portals and online social profiles as well. Brilliant. Thank you so much, folks, to all in attendance, and certainly a huge thanks to Matt for contributing towards today. We're going to stop recording now, call it quits, and enjoy a nice Thursday afternoon of sunshine. So thank you very much.
Take care then.